Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. And with me for episode 590 is our Cardinals review show as they took on the Rams, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And Seth, can you believe it? It's been a decade. In fact, it wasn't just any decade. The last time the Cardinals beat the Rams on the road, it was the Carson Palmer ACL game. That's how long it had been. They'd only beaten
at home.
Yes, that's the last time they had beaten them at home. They had beaten the Rams at home, was the Carson Palmer game when Drew Stanton came in and threw that game-winning touchdown to John Brown. And holy cow, it's been 10 years. It's only the third win over the Rams since Sean McVay took over. And whoo, that was as perfect a game as you've ever seen. I tell me, have we ever seen since Bruce Arians as complete an offensive performance as that? I was trying to think back even to Cliff Kingsbury days. I'm like, maybe the Dallas game in 2020 against Andy Dalton.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, the overall, the scoring was so impressive, but it was the way that they did it, and it was so balanced, something you and I talk about all the time with this group. And you look at it, right? I mean, last year they had a good performance against Philly. I think they had four touchdowns, double checking on this, 2 field goals, 1, 2, 3, 4 offensive touchdowns. So, not quite as good last year. And that was their high water mark last year offensively. 2022, I think their high water mark was the New Orleans game. And I think that came with 2 defensive touchdowns, if I remember right.
I think so. And it's on the side note, it's possible the Cardinals could face Andy Dalton again.
I know, right? It's crazy. Yeah, and like that New Orleans game, offensively, they had 341 yards of offense. Not bad at all. Not bad. But again, it wasn't, a dominant offensive performance. So yeah, I mean, you really have to look at it. Maybe that first game against Tennessee, right? They had a great game that game. You had 136 rushing yards, 289 passing yards. I think 5 total touchdowns because you had 4. You had 5 from Kyler by himself, if I remember right? 4 passing and one rushing. You had a really that was probably the closest one. That was 2021, and that was early in the season, and everybody felt really, really good about that. They had that good one against the Rams on in LA when they won 37-20. If you remember that one a little bit, that was another good one. But yeah, nothing like where they just. I mean, when was the last time it seemed easy?
It's like they took the first half against the Bills and added to it, right? That's what we'll start talking offense, because the offense was great. It's a 41-10 beatdown. They gained nearly 500 yards of offense. Kyler was fantastic, one of the best games we've ever seen from him. And then we'll go on to the defense and what we think it means. But offensively, it kind of put everything together. We talked about the run game was strong. Like the very first 2 carries that James Conner had were 13 and 16 yards. Against Buffalo, they had everything, because you had the James Conner runs. Obviously, like, we got to talk about Marvin Harrison. We talked about how they needed to, pressure the boundaries. And what did they do? Challenge Tre'Davious White. And what did we see? Tre'Davious White is maybe cooked, or at least just can't keep up with the young speedsters, because Harrison's first quarter, and as great a game, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns, 130 receiving yards, should have been more, because like the only 4 incompletions that Kyler had were to Harrison, and one was, like, if we're looking at the incompletions, one, Kyler just missed him. One of the, like, on the end zone fade, Marv should have gotten that. Like, he was just not right there. The very first incompletion, that was a great play by Trey White, the breaking up that first pass, but he could have had 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, and the fact that here's the wild thing. I don't know if you wrote about it, but I ran across it on Twitter and then wrote about it, is that he did something that no other rookie had done since his dad in 1996. The last rookie, he's the first rookie to catch 4 passes and score 2 touchdowns in a quarter since his father did it in week 15 of 1996. And Marv, the younger Marv Jr., even outdid his dad in the sense that was his father's best game as a rookie. He had 3 touchdown passes, but 106 receiving yards. Harrison, like Marv Jr.'s quarter of 130 yards, was better than any of his dad's games as a rookie. That was truly wild, but it was exactly what we wanted to see. I mean, you got the DeAndre Hopkins like, and I guess we're going to forget, who does he look like? That touchdown that he hauled in the back of the end zone, that was very DeAndre Hopkins like. The getting deep and then diving for the end zone, that felt Larry Fitzgerald like. But we forget who is he built almost identically to? AJ Green. Then, like, we're not talking old AJ Green. We're talking completely dominant, one of the top 3 receivers in the NFL, young Cincinnati Bengals. AJ Green from like 2011 to 2019, and Marv's built the exact same way.
Yeah, and I think he's a little smoother than he ever was. AJ was not, and that's not taking anything away from AJ, but I think he's a little smoother of an operator. I've always said he's got a lot of like DeAndre Hopkins to him, right? Like, he does things that you're like, oh man, because he doesn't move like a ultra elite athlete, but he just
he has elite athlete movements. You just can't tell, like the way he caught the pass in the back of the end zone with his 2 feet down and just hauling that ball in. That was very much DeAndre. That was a really hard catch to make. Really hard catch to make. It's amazing that he did it. It was good to see. And then the route he broke off for the 60-yarder, because he recognized something, that route wasn't even supposed to go that way. He was supposed to stay at about 12 yards deep and just come across the field. But he felt nobody behind him, so he broke it off a little bit, and Kyler found him. And Harrison looked every bit the part. And the fact that they left plays on the field, you're like, okay, this is going to be fun when they actually utilize him. So, and I think it played to their benefit, the fact that, I guess, Buffalo did not have, because of their new secondary, didn't trust any one player to guard him. And the Rams, with a veteran like Tre'Davious White, schematically, they're like, okay, you take him. We know you got him, and he didn't have him. So the Rams might be changing, philosophy soon in terms of their defensive backfield.
Yeah, and I remember you and I talking about Tre'Davious, right? And Tre'Davious White, right? Like, you and I had a conversation about him for free agency and all that, and people were like, this secondary, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, guys, he was cooked in Buffalo. Like, Buffalo didn't get rid of him because of any other reason other than he was just cooked. Like, he was done. And it's unfortunate because he was a great player. It's just unfortunate when those guys have short primes, right? Like they just don't last very long, but it'll be all right. And I think these guys, he's going to be all right. You just have to readjust your expectations of him, and that's unfortunate because again, he was a all pro level, and now he's just a decent
Doesn't it
low
feel like
into kind of
Patrick Peterson's last year with the Cardinals?
yeah.
Now he did sort of remake himself and did play really well for Minnesota, but it did kind of feel like at the end of Arizona's time is that while you steal some of the south of the seam, the floor was much, much lower than it used to be.
Right. And so we'll see. But overall, I mean, right now you have to look at this and you say this offense, and they still haven't really put it all together yet. I mean, the thing is with this offense that's really fun is that I don't think we're ever going to get a day where it's like, oh, there was 400 yards passing and 75 yards rushing. Like their offensive output's going to be that, you look at game one, even though it was 270 yards, 146, 124. You look at game two, almost just under 500 yards, 489 yards, 258 and 231. Like that's who they are, right? Like it's balanced. It is physical. I love the fact that they're having so much success out of 12 and 13 personnel. And if you don't know what that means, 12 personnel refers to the running backs and the 2 refers to the tight end. So anytime you hear a number like 21, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, or 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. So 12 and 13 personnel is, they're 2 tight ends on the field or 3 tight ends on the field. And they seem to really love that.
Yeah. And they do like passing out of those formations too.
Well,
I think
wasn't that the big thing about getting Marvin Harrison is that he's a big physical guy that can win as a true X, but like you can line him up inside, you can utilize him in a number of different ways. And I think the first touchdown, I'm going to double check right now, but I think it was 13 personnel on the field. I think it was he and I think he was at the X position, so on the left, offensive left side, out wide, and then it was Trey in the slot or even in line as a tight end. So the second one was definitely 13 because it was double wing, single tight double wing. So they had Elijah Higgins as a wing back on the left side next to Paris Johnson, Trey McBride in line as a tight end, Tip Ryman as a wing back on the right side, and then Marvin was the only one. And then I'm looking now. So this was dude, both of those came out of 13 personnel. That's crazy because it was double tight and 2 wide, but the other wide receiver was Tip Ryman.
And they'd like to, because they run so well out of them, but because of the personnel that they have, because of Trey McBride, because of Marvin Harrison, you also get the receiving threat as well, it's really kind of fun. It's really fun to see. Now, Kyler's play, is that as complete a game? Like you can look at some of the plays. So you can look at the Tennessee game. You can look at the Miami game in 2020 that they lost. When you look at not just the running, but the way he passed the ball, the way he moved in the pocket, the way he used his legs, that was one of the absolutely most complete games. One of, if not the best, a top 3 game in Kyler's career. He was in a zone. He was absolutely in a zone. And it was good to see because he is kind of a rhythm guy, but they passed enough. And I feel like sometimes when they run the ball a lot, it does take the passing game a little out of sync. But but they got production from, obviously when you get Marv on the outside producing like that, it makes things easier. And the fact that what would I saw that James Conner saw a stuffed box less than half the time when that didn't happen against Buffalo. That's why there was, you got Harrison involved early. It made it really hard to sell out against the run. But Kyler was so good. His passing, the James Conner's like he was in his bag. Like when he released the ball on that crazy play that he was dancing around for like 9 seconds and then had to hit the touchdown pass to Elijah Higgins in the end zone. He said the second it left his hand, he knew it was a touchdown, and he turned around and was celebrating while the ball was still in the air, if you watch the replay. But, he had a mix of just throwing the ball really well, making good decisions, and then he had those crazy the Elijah Higgins touchdown pass. That's something like really only Kyler Murray and maybe 2 other quarterbacks in the NFL can do. That was wild.
Well, and the other thing is, going back to Marv real quick, everybody was complaining about the speed, right? Like the concerns about the speed. Really interesting to note. One is, and I think I text you guys this in our little group chat, that the average speed of a route is between 16 and 18 miles per hour. So when you don't have any just free runs, that's what happens, right? Like it's just not something that you see very often. But coming out of week 2, obviously, sorry, there's only been 3 rookie wide receivers who have had a max speed over 20 miles per hour. Brian Thomas, who's we know is faster than Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, who's probably a little faster than Marvin Harrison Jr., and Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's not like it's like we as in not you and me, but we all had something to say last week, and it was like, guys, a lot of it was just simply he didn't catch the ball. Like
right.
if you don't get the ball and have a chance to run, it's really hard to reach a top speed. And so to see, and by the way, Malik Neighbors was 20.4 and Marvin Harrison's was 20.02. So like that 0.4 roughly miles per hour, that's, that'll be, I mean, again, the 1.4 miles from Brian Thomas, that's not Marvin's game. But the 20.4, I wouldn't be surprised to see if he surpasses that, in the coming weeks. And so, it's just really interesting because people wanted to make a big deal out of a lot of things, and it's like, guys, you got to let the season play out. And it was interesting. I saw some comments and then some thoughts overall, and I want to get your take, especially with the offense, because I think we still have valid concerns about the defense, but one of the things that I read was that that Buffalo game ended up kind of being the pseudo preseason game for them, right? Like,
yeah, there was
like it or not. By the way, it's not like we're saying that was the correct way to do things, but it feels like that ended up being the game, the preseason game for them. They didn't show a whole lot. They didn't do a whole lot differently. And then they came out and kind of just felt like they found what worked for them, especially against a really, not good Rams team. Buddy of mine, Billy Martin, on X, was one of the people. And by the way, he did not think the Cardinals would be good this year. So I don't want people to go to his post and see it and then say, hey, he didn't like the Cardinals either. But I think he had the Rams at 5-12 this year. Like, he really did not believe, like, he's like, they're on completely thin ice and it's already kind of cracked, right? Like,
oh my gosh, the offensive line injuries.
Now Cooper Kupp's out for a while.
Cooper Kupp out.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations, man, where I think, and then the other thing that came of that game, and we got to talk a little bit about it on Thursday, Buffalo's just really freaking good.
Yeah, that was the other thing, is when the way they dismantled Miami, you felt better about the loss, especially when they got the lead and then were in a position to potentially win at the end of the game. So that was encouraging. When our show later this week, obviously Detroit's a different beast, and so if the Cardinals can replicate this against Detroit, all right, because we all figure if they're still healthy in Week 4, that Washington defense, that's
they're
no
going to be in
bueno.
trouble. Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point. Like, and again, we'll chat about this on Thursday, but we're talking about the offensive performance. As we get to the defense here shortly, there is a little to no expectation to see that dominant of a performance from the defense again, especially against a great Detroit offense. But if the offense can be right around there, and I was talking to somebody about this, if Kyler can be 90%, 85 to 90% of what he was in this game, that's borderline MVP level. Right.
Well, like here, you sent this to the group chat and I ran with it. So just 2 games. Okay. We know just 2 games. But if you take his 2 games and then you put that over 17, he doesn't hit that 4,000 passing yard mark. He's got a little more than 3,600 passing yards, 34 touchdown passes, and 986 rushing yards. When you sent that, you know who I said in the text, you know what that looks like immediately? That looked like Lamar Jackson MVP numbers. Because in 2019, he had 3,100 passing yards, 1,200 rushing yards, 36 touchdown passes, and then 7 rushing scores. Last year, 3,600, almost 3,700 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 820 rushing yards, and 5 touchdowns. And this is a guy that won MVP over the course of those 2 seasons, getting 99 out of 100 first place votes. Now, wins. The Ravens won. He won 13 games as a starter both times. So that's the other part that goes into it.
Right.
But if we're talking about Kyler Murray, reaching that echelon, you talked about it, like what you wanted to see. You wanted to see, 4,500 combined yards, 35 plus total touchdowns. That's what he's hitting right now. And I didn't just take the 2 games. I also looked at the last 3 games of last year. So I'm looking at his last 5 games. That is over 3,900 passing yards, 34 touchdown passes, and 697 rushing yards. They're like I said, they're not guaranteed MVP numbers, but they're MVP-like numbers, which that's what we were used to seeing Kyler do. That's what he was ascending to before 2022 happened.
Right, and that's all that matters, right? Like, is that they're playing at a level similar to that. You just wanted to see him playing at that level, giving this team a chance to compete every week. And I know game 1 wasn't exactly what we wanted, but at the same time it was, in the sense that it gave them a chance to compete, right?
Yeah, and then we didn't even talk about James Conner's rushing, the fact that Emari DeMarcado ripped one off at the end of the game. Trey McBride got his production. It was good from across the board. I guess the one not bright spot was Trey Benson's running, but even then, like he and Connor talked about this after the game, that Trey he turned those what could have been losses into line of scrimmage 1-yard gains. He had 11 carries for 10 yards, but rookie guys have to get used to that, and especially in a complementary role. And also, he has to get used to what it is running in this particular scheme. And defenses, it's different. The defense sees Trey Benson in the game. They are going to defend it slightly differently, because that's just how that goes. But yeah, everything. And we have to throw a shout out to Kelvin Beachum, because he was the weak spot, the weak link in week 1 on the offensive line. and he was going to have his hands full with Byron Young. And guess what? He was very good against Byron Young. He was good in the run game, and getting that full week of practice in, I think, made the difference. And he showed that, he'll be able to hold up. Like, maybe he's not Jonah Williams, but you're not going to be, if he's healthy and preparing all week, you're not going to be in a terrible spot.
No, when he's your worst offensive lineman and he's playing that well, it's not a bad thing, right? Like that's the big thing. And they're getting a lot of their offensive line's continuing to play well. I think obviously the pass blocking was better this week. Obviously, Kyler had a couple plays where he was Kyler and just, he's one of one when he does stuff like that. But I thought that, and then obviously in the run game, they're so big, they're so physical up front, man. It's fun to watch them work. And man, hasn't Evan Brown been just kind of I don't even know what the word is.
He's just been very solid. And Drew Petzing talked about it, is like, being that he's been a center before, the fact that, when Yelda's got his head down, you've basically got two centers to recognize things. And so when Yelda is getting ready and he's got his head down, Evan can see things and make adjustments and make calls. And that was people wondered, like, well, like, he's never played left guard. Is that, but like, it was very clear from the very beginning of the offseason that was the plan, that he was going to be the left guard, and they haven't swayed from that. And hopefully he stays healthy. After last year where we had four different guys, it was Elijah Wilkinson, then it was Dennis Daly, then it was Tristan Colon, then it was Carter O'Donnell, then it was Elijah Wilkinson again, and then they were by the end of the year, they were rotating between Wilkinson and Cologne. That was, Evan Brown playing every snap is, well, he didn't even technically play every snap because, well, actually he did. He did, because the guys that they took out when they actually got to get the young guys in, Jackson Barton got to play, Tristan Colon got to play, and Isaiah Adams got to play. But they took out Paris, they took out Yelda, and they took out Will, and so Evan got to finish the game still. And that was fun to see. When you get you're winning by so much, you can put in, it looks like a preseason lineup, and then you've got Zach Pascal and Chris Moore on the outside, and you've got Amari DiMercato in the backfield, and Clayton Tune. Clayton Tune taking snaps, though. Of course, Clayton Tune fumbled the ball and all that. But yeah, coming next on the Rise of Secret podcast, the best our Cardinals talking about. It's going to the defensive side of the ball, because guess what? Defense is pretty good too. That's coming next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talking about the defensive side of the ball. And I think probably the number one thing, well, I think there were two very important things. That was one, they kept Kyron Williams under control, and two, they did exactly what you would hope that your team can do against a third-string left tackle. Will McClendon had some struggles. Dennis Gardeck had 3 sacks. Even Collins had a sack. But if you look at that was exactly what you would want to see from even okay pass rushers, is to abuse the third-string left tackle. That's what should happen.
Yeah, and we talked about it on the show last week. Like, Dennis Gardeck needed to make plays. He was a complete monster against their third string left tackle, owned the game. The biggest thing is, and we never want to be downers off a win like this, but again, if you can get 75% of that game consistently, that's more important to us, right? Like, the one-off games where he goes for 2-3 sacks is great, but the consistency is what has got to find its way into the pass rush situation. And the guy that's done that through 2 games is Zaven Collins, right? Like, Zaven through 2 games has 2 sacks. I know only 1 on the stat sheet, but he's got 2 sacks. He's been incredibly consistent. And the funny thing is, he didn't even play a whole lot in this game. Like he
No.
and Gardeck played about half of the snaps, which allowed them to get other guys in, right? Like they were able to rotate guys in.
We saw Julian Okwara. We got a little bit of Xavier Thomas.
What did you think of that penalty? I thought that was kind of soft, especially when Mike Wilholt did it to Trey. I think it was Trey McBride later on, and Trey let him know about it too afterwards. Like, hey, don't take that shot on me. Like, especially, I mean, if that's my biggest thing with officials. Like, if you want to make that call, make the call. It's fine, but then it's got to set the precedent for the rest of the game.
Right.
That call is going to happen anytime anything like that happens, and then and I don't want to take anything away from what he did. A dive into the lower back is tough, but I mean, Will Hoyt did it to McBride's head. Like it was a cheap, dirty shot that didn't draw a flag, and it's like, how is that not a flag, but a dive into the back is? And it's that's where people get frustrated with officials. It's not the call per se, right? It's the lack of
right. It's like
at
least if it's being called the same both ways, you can have the same expectations. I know that's a big thing, especially in baseball with strike zones, but you want to see the same thing in football. The one thing about Zaven is on the one play got the sack. That impressed me. Something that we really haven't seen, the bend that he got on that play.
Yeah, that was yours.
Whoa! He looked like a pass rusher. He didn't just push a guy and beat a guy. Like he had a move and a counter move, and then he got that bend underneath on the inside. I'm like, he looks like a pass rusher.
And I thought, we're seeing some guys, and it's tough to read this based on how they're utilizing guys right now. And I think obviously a 2-game sample size, like we gave the caveat with Kyler's statistics, but I think I'm really enjoying how they're using guys. I talked about it before the season started with the talk of Mac Wilson, being a guy that rushed the passer a little bit. He didn't do it nearly as much in this game, only 2 pass rushes, but Owen Papo being on the field a little more, right? And he's looked very comfortable.
Yeah, it's been a nice progression. It's always nice when you see these young players progress into something more than they were. And the Cardinals actually defensively, they utilized. Now, this is in part because of the Rams use a lot of 11 personnel. So they go 3 wide. That's like their thing. They went basically, I don't think I ever saw a base personnel the entire game from them. And so their base was their big nickel, where they only had Kaiser at the linebacker spot. So you had your 3 interior defenders, the 2 edge guys, and then Kaiser in the middle. And they went for, then did they have a few traditional nickels where they went 2-4? Yes, but their base that game was 3 interior defenders, 2 outside backers, and then Kaiser playing the middle and keeping 5 defensive backs, where you got Jalen and Buddha, you've got Starr, you've got Sean Murphy Bunting, and you've got Garrett Williams. And
we saw a little more of Max Melton in this game.
Yeah, he's starting to get, again, Keytrell has a role. It's nice. And Keytrell, through 2 games, Keytrell in that dime role, he's good.
And do you know who he kind of reminds me of? Michael Adams. You remember Michael Adams?
Yes. Only Michael Adams was so tiny.
Yeah, but I mean, just that kind of annoying, good cover, physical like that's how Keytrell's playing really well. I thought, overall, I thought their coverage was good.
It did help that Cooper Kupp did get hurt before halftime, but they
were even controlling him at times.
Yes,
I mean, Buddha had a great pass breakup on a play. We saw Starling Thomas get beat, but like recover nicely and make a quick tackle. Like that's the thing that people don't get. Like as a father now of a corner, the one thing that people don't get is like situational awareness. And it's like, hey, you know what you're not going to do on 2nd and 7? You're not going to beat me over the top. So I'll give up a 6-yard 5-yard, 6-yard gain, and then hopefully my team can help me, get a stop on third down. But
Kupp is nearly impossible to shut out because his route running is too good. And so it's a matter of do you get him down immediately, or does that 7-yard gain turn into 25 because he runs away from you?
Well, not just that, but the sheer volume of targets that they give the guy is beyond absurd, right? It was something we talked about. I mean, you look at it, like you said, he only played one half, Jess. 2 games. This guy has 27 targets already. Like his game was, he had 4 catches and 6 targets in a game, like in a half. Like it's just, yeah, like you said, wild, doesn't even begin to describe it. And it's unfortunate. I mean, we talked about it, like we hate seeing him get hurt because it's not something you want to see. Like, I don't think that had an impact on the outcome of the game. I they probably would have scored another touchdown or so.
Yeah, maybe it's 41-20,
but they weren't getting any stops on defense. And quite frankly, the Cardinals probably would have really slowed down the game even more, right? Like,
yeah,
they probably would have forced the run just a touch more. But it's good to see. I mean, we talked about it. Melton got 25 snaps. Papo got 16 snaps. You mentioned it. Keitrell Clark only got 8 snaps, but he's doing it extremely, extremely well. Xavier Thomas got 21 snaps. So you're seeing these young guys get the snaps and play well. Rabbit got 8 snaps for the first time in his career. And then the other thing that we have to mention this week, because we kind of mentioned in an incredibly negative but correct way last week, Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones showed up this week, right?
They did. It was very nice to see them and hear their names getting called. They were what they needed them to be. You needed them to be that way. The one downside, you had the one really bad play, the Demarcus Robinson 42-yard thing, which you had Buddha and I think it was Star back there, or maybe it was Garrett. Buddha was in position,
and he should have picked it up. Yeah,
I heard him talking about it. He was after the game. This was not part of like interviews, but I heard him talking to one of the other players, and he was so pissed about that because at the time, like he was covering, he was looking at the quarterback, and then when he turned, didn't know where the ball was, and so that's what happened. If had he not looked for the ball and just stayed with Robinson, the ball gets broken up. But that was the one negative. And honestly, I was like, oh boy. But Buddha had a much better game.
Yeah, he played really well. I thought the defense as a whole played well. I mean, that was kind of what we were concerned about. And again, when you're playing against second and third string offensive linemen, it doesn't matter if Kyron Williams is back there. It doesn't matter if Matthew Stafford's back there. It doesn't matter if Cooper Kupp's back there. You should be able to control the line of scrimmage and make life harder on them. They did that this week, and that is what mattered to us over everything else. Because we've said it, like, if this team's going to win, they need performances like this. We know they're not going to be every week. We know for a fact that they're not going to hold the running backs for any team to 40 or 53 yards on 20 carries. Not going to happen.
Just right. All like 28 of those yards came in garbage time.
Right. Exactly.
That's when the Cardinals had their backups in the game on defense at the end of the game.
We know that you're not going to hold, we know that 5 sacks a game is not going to happen. I mean, that would be an astronomical season sack-wise. Like, it's not going to happen. So in certain games, yes, that needs to happen. Like you mentioned, the Commanders in a week or so, like that needs to be something that they do. But for the most part, like when they have an opportunity to beat teams that we didn't, neither of us ever were thinking this was going to happen, but we both picked them to win this game.
We picked them to win. This was actually a game that we thought that they would win when the schedule first came out. Just not
like this.
Joe, no. On all the every prediction, it was a one-score game on everything. So coming up next on the Res of Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. What does the win say? What do we know about the Cardinals? What is this team? That's coming next on Res of Red. We're back on the Res of Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Now we're after 2 games. They're 1-1. What does this say about the Cardinals? Do we know who they are yet? I know offensively they are second in the NFL in points scored behind the New Orleans Saints, who have been, oh my gosh. I don't even know what to think about that. But
well, that's one of those where the first game you're like, okay, we see it. It was the Panthers. They're awful. But the second game is the one you're like, oh, all right.
Now 47 on the Cowboys. You're like,
yeah,
wait.
Yeah, you're like, now you've got my attention.
Yeah, that's like I jumped them up like 12 spots, and you can't help but put them up in the top 10. Like if you do power rankings, like normally there's not very much drastic stuff, but week 1, week 2, it's wild. It's wild how things change, and that's how things have gone. Like even now with the Rams, like they lost Cooper Kupp. They don't look like they have much hope right now. They're 0-2, and what is it? I think I saw a stat on ESPN that in the last 5 years, only 3 of 41 teams who started the season 0-2 made the postseason.
Yeah, and you know the Rams. You look at that first game, right? And we can go back to it just a touch. And you never want to talk crap before you play a team. But after what Detroit did last week against Tampa Bay, their overtime win over LA is less impressive, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, okay, why did it take you to overtime to beat that team that isn't very good? That was, I mean, Puka left in the first half. I know Cooper Kupp was in the whole game, but it just, you look at it and you go, that wasn't very good to have to go at home to overtime with that team. And that being said, you look at the Rams and you go, you don't want to do too much transitive property stuff, right? Like you're not like, all right, well, the Lions only beat the Rams by 6 and the Cardinals beat them by 31. So the Cardinals should be 25 points.
20 point.
Yeah. But you do look at it and you go, okay, the Lions aren't there yet. Doesn't mean they won't be there. They're an insanely well coached and prepared team on both sides of the ball, but through 2 games they're not there yet. And you look at the Cardinals and you said, okay, they didn't show us everything we wanted to see in game 1. We're left a little wanting offensively in the second half. Obviously we have hashed out the terrible defensive effort in game 1. And so you go, okay, obviously game 2 was completely different. There's got to be I don't want to say a middle ground. I think offensively you go, all right, if you're in between those 2 things, if you're in between, 270 and 490 yards,
so 350 yards, but they consistently 350 to 400.
Right. If you're in that 375 range, I think you feel good. It's the defensive thing. It's like, all right, we know it's not going to be below 250. Hell, I mean, how many games did they have last year where they gave up less than 250 yards, if any? They had one, and that was in week 1 against the Washington Commander-Skins. Like their defense,
and that was such an ugly, gross game.
Right. And so their defense was, and so they've already matched last year's total, baby. They've already exceeded it because last year the one game was 248. So they already beat it with 245 this year, right? Like, so you look at it, you say, all right, we know it's not going to be 245. Let's just, if it is in the 350 range. Let's bring it down to the 325. Hell, if we can be just above 300, we're in a great spot to win games. And that's kind of where you're at, is like, you kind of want to find that middle ground, because we know not every week's going to be like the Rams, but we can't have every week be like the Bills either. So it's got to be that middle ground where you say, okay, this is a team that produces 375 yards a game on offense, and gives up about 300, 325 a game on defense. And you feel confident that, even though those are tight numbers, that you're going to end up being a team that wins more of those games than they lose. And that gets us to that 8-9 wins that we've talked about from jump, right? Like, that's been the goal. Now, you and I think, are excellent at reconfiguring our goals as the season goes. We set what our goals are for the season, for what we want to see from this team,
and then see, are they ahead of schedule? Are they are they behind the sticks? And I think with the way they won, that they are like, maybe like result wise, they're where we thought they would be, but performance probably a little bit ahead.
Right. And what we don't want to see is a crash this week. We don't want to see that great first half, terrible second half, great game. We don't want to see a bad game, right?
Right.
We want to see it can be a great half and a good half, or a good half and a great half. Or two good
or
halves,
just
right?
or two just very fought, like very tough competitive halves.
Yeah, I mean, if we saw that, we'd be like, okay, that's good too. Like those things can work out for those ways, but right now we don't know what to expect, just because we have so little to go off of. But the reality is that this team, like you said, through 2 games, the results are where we expected them to be, but the product is slightly very slightly ahead of where we expected. And so we reconvene after that 49ers game in week 5, when we're about a third of the way through the season, and we say, okay, are they 2-3? Are they 3-2? Are they 4-1? And then we go, okay, let's reevaluate before they get to the bye week in week 10, and and they're 10 games into the season. So that's how you and I have always done it. And I think we do a good job of resetting those things. But I think right now they're exactly where we expected them to be in terms of results, and slightly
just how
ahead.
It happened was surprising, because week 1 we thought that they would have a competitive game against the Bills. We just didn't think that they would come out the way they did and look so good, only to collapse. And we did not think that this game would be the blowout it was. And so we've really got what we've got. There's 6 quarters of just incredible offensive football. And if we kind of look on 2 games, okay, offensively, the Cardinals can kind of do what they want, especially if they get Harrison involved. It's really hard to stop them. And Kyler is moving. Like, Kyler's playing at the top of his game right now. Defensively, we can look at, they're not being killed by any receivers. They are holding their own in the run game against running backs. James Cook had a good game in the pass game, but and he's looked great as well. But 71 yards to James Cook, 25 yards to Kyren Williams. And so 2 tricky spots the Cardinals had last year, among other things, running backs, they couldn't do anything against them. And so far through 2 games, they are better against running backs, and nobody in the passing game is killing them. So far, what we've seen is that they had no answer for Josh Allen. Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And so...
And it's not just that, right? Like, were able to contain Matthew Stafford, which they really haven't done before. And then you kind of look at what the Lions bring in, and the Lions offensively haven't been bad by any means, but they haven't lived up to what the expectation was for this game. But the big thing will be, this is one of the best run defenses in the NFL against one of, if not the best rushing offenses in the NFL. So that's going to be the matchup to watch and give us an idea of like, how can this team adjust based on what the other team presents to them? Like, can they get something from Kyler Murray? And that's going to be fun to talk about on Thursday.
Yes. Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best our Cardinals talking about. Now let's wrap up the show, but talking about what's going on in the NFC West, because it's going kind of weird right now. That's coming next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, the Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Wrapping up the show on this segment, we are talking about the NFC West. And right now, the two teams that we thought should be the class of the division are broken. And I'm not saying broken in terms of their play, broken because of health. The 49ers looked very mortal, and the Minnesota's beaten, apparently Minnesota's the one team Brock Purdy can't beat, and Minnesota beat them, but Christian McCaffrey's on injured reserve. Deebo Samuel's going to be out a couple of weeks. Brandon Ayuk is not yet in form, so they look not dominant, right? And then you look at the Rams, and they are just the walking wounded, just devastating. Like, Cooper Kupp's going to be out for a few games. Puka's on injured reserve. Joe Noteboom's on injured reserve. Steve Avila's on injured reserve. There was just note that about Jonah Jackson's going to have to go on injured reserve. So they've got, now they do get Alaric Jackson back, but their offense keeps taking hits. And that was a team that looked like it could be ascending, but unless that young crew of defenders can become dominant, that Rams team might fall apart in a hurry. That might be like how how a couple of years ago they basically just stashed Matthew Stafford and said, we'll take our lumps. They might not be far from that. And the 49ers, they'll get back on track, but they look vulnerable right now. The Cardinals look ascending, and what the heck? I don't know what to think of Seattle so far, but they're 2-0.
Yeah, and their 2-0 looks interesting because you look at their two games. They've been two very competitive, close games against. I mean, the Broncos are awful. Let's be completely
and we expected
honest.
The Patriots to be awful, but that's a better than expected defense. And Jacoby Brissett's okay.
I mean, the fact that they ran for 185 yards and only threw for 125 yards and took that team to overtime is kind of tells me everything I need to know about the Seahawks. Like, they're not the Seahawks of old. And that's fine.
Which is funny. Isn't this almost exactly what Pete Carroll would have liked from a team?
Right.
They replaced him because and it was Geno. Geno was fantastic because DK Metcalf had 129 yards. Jackson Smith and Jigma had 117 yards. Geno Smith threw for 327 and a touchdown. He was 33 for 44. They only got 46 yards rushing. Zach Charbonnet gave them 38 yards. I'm guessing Ken Walker was hurt.
Yeah, he must have been, because he did not. He had like barely any carries in this game. So, he didn't play. So yeah, so he had to have been hurt in this one, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see, because they are, it's still the 49ers, right? Like, let's be completely honest about this, but the 49ers are in a difficult spot. Debo's out for a while. It seems like Christian McCaffrey is going to miss the first game between the Cardinals and 49ers. Trent Williams doesn't look completely back yet. and that's not unexpected because, well, when you don't do anything for the summer and take all of training camp and preseason off, it's tough, right? And so we'll see what happens overall, but I mean, with the talent on the 49ers, the biggest shock to, and you know, my information always comes from Kyle Posey because I just don't have the time to watch them. But my information comes from Kyle Posey whenever I talk about the Niners. He's the managing editor of Niners Nation, but he's also, and he's not a Niners fan, which makes it even better for me because I can, you know, I know it's objective, but he's also a high school football coach, one of the smartest, like, actual football guys I know. And so, like, reading what he's writing about it's interesting because a lot of it he discusses a lot of, you know, the 6 sacks they gave up in the game against the Vikings, which is a lot of sacks, let's be completely honest. And then you look at their defense not being what we expected. That's a little surprising. That's where I gotta, for myself, dig in, because it's hard to imagine a defense with that talent, especially, you know, led by Nick Bosa, that they're struggling as much as they are. But through 2 games, they haven't been the defense that everybody expected. And while Fred Warner and Nick Bosa are elite, it's the fact that nobody else is producing at the rate that they're expected that makes it really difficult to kind of pick up. And you know, it could be one of those things that's like, hey, in a couple games it'll all be back to normal, no big deal. But it'll be interesting to watch, because I think with the injuries that they're dealing with, the egos that obviously got involved, and then just, you know, the unfortunate accident with Ricky Pearsall getting shot, like, they've had a very rough offseason. But as we know, if they make the playoffs, it doesn't matter, right? They're as long as they're healthy come the playoffs, it doesn't matter. But it's also, I mean, let's be honest, this Super Bowl hangover thing's real. I mean, we've seen it time and time and time again, that playing at that level for that long and then losing, especially in the manner that they did, it makes grinding it out again extremely difficult, because you realize that sometimes you're just not going to reach the goal that you've set. And you know, that'll be something to watch for them. I would rank it still, personally, Niners, Seahawks, Cardinals, Rams. And I think even if the Cardinals were to beat the Niners in 2 weeks, not overlooking Detroit at all, just saying, if the Cardinals were to beat the Niners in 2 weeks, I still think I would have the Niners at the top, unless it was like a game like we just saw, right? Like,
Yeah.
I would need to see, like, oh, this team is cooked, like we're kind of feeling about the Rams right now. The Seahawks game is now the one I'm really looking forward to, if I'm being completely honest, because
Yeah.
I kind of want to see who this Seahawks team is, because, again, they haven't played anybody.
Well, and they're going to play the Dolphins with no Tua, so 3-0 is very possible. Doesn't it, in a way, kind of look at they kind of look like the way things are going is kind of how the Giants did their first year under Brian Dable? It just they're not, you don't know, and then they just win games you don't expect. Now, week 4, they play Monday night on the road against Detroit. So I think we'll kind of get a feel for what they are after that. So they play Detroit on the road in week 4.
But then they get the Giants and 49ers at home,
yeah,
and then they're at Atlanta. So it's like, you know,
come on, they will, and if they get enough wins, because if they start gelling late in the year, so you could either see that collapse, or you could see them finish okay, and then they're a playoff team,
right? And
unexpectedly.
I think that was kind of apropos what you said, though, is like obviously without the Daniel Jones rabbit out of the hat that Dable pulled in year one. I think that was a good, kind of callback, because you're looking at it and you're going, okay, they open with Denver. Denver's awful. New England's better than expected, but still, I mean, they're still at best this third best team in the AFC East.
Then they're going to play Miami with no Tua.
Right. and who knows, maybe next week, after the Cardinals are done with the Lions, we're saying maybe the Lions aren't that good.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But yeah, the NFC West is not what we thought it was after last year. 3 playoffs team and the Cardinals, is that was that dragon meme with the 3 teams, or the 3 dragons scowling and the Cardinals cross-eyed with their tongue out. But this year it doesn't seem to be that way, but maybe it is. Maybe it's 3 teams again, and the Rams are the goofball this year, right?
Maybe. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up to Your podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk. And we've got 2 shows coming up. I will be talking with Lions Wire's Jeff Risdon for our opponent preview. And then it looks like later in the week, it'll probably just me alone, just because of scheduling and things, how that goes. But I will have Seth's picks and some of Seth's takes as well when we record the later show. That wraps up episode 590. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.